In the quiet fields of rural Kent, three boys built a makeshift fort deep in the woods, just another summer adventure. But when Callum, the war-obsessed one, showed up with what looked like a real grenade and an old Luger pistol, their playful afternoon spiraled into something terrifying. What began as a harmless game quickly turned into a brush with death when the gun unexpectedly discharged. No one could have predicted how close they'd come to tragedy, or how it would change them forever. This is the true story of how one boy's obsession nearly turned a childhood memory into a headline. Thomas Tommy Hale grew up in the rolling countryside of Kent during the late 1980s in a sleepy English village where every summer felt like a small world of its own. The kind of place with rusted bike frames, blackberry bushes, and trails through the woods that only kids seemed to know existed. But what made those years unforgettable wasn't just the place, it was the people. Tommy's closest friend was Callum Briggs, a boy whose fascination with war bordered on obsession. Callum wasn't like the other kids. While most played soccer or watched cartoons, he spent his allowance on World War II model kits and devoured history books about Normandy and North Africa. Then there was Neville Cray, always tagging along, always complaining, but somehow always around. He wasn't part of the inner circle, but he was part of the story. Together, they explored the forest, built forts from fallen branches, and unknowingly stepped into a day that would haunt them well into adulthood. A day when a childhood game veered dangerously close to real tragedy. Callum's fascination with war didn't come from comic books or Saturday morning cartoons. It came from his grandfather, Albert Briggs. Mr. Briggs, a World War II veteran, lived alone in a modest one-story flat just 2 blocks from Tommy's grandparents. He wasn't the kind of old soldier who bragged or wore his medals in public. In fact, he rarely spoke about the war at all. But that only fueled Callum's curiosity. Every Sunday after lunch, Callum and Tommy would bike over to the flat, and while Tommy politely chatted with Mr. Briggs about football or school, Callum would sneak off to the back room, the one with the locked cabinet, the dusty footlocker, and the faint smell of gun oil. Mr. Briggs never seemed to mind. Maybe he thought it was harmless. Maybe he didn't know what Callum was really looking for. Over time, Callum became obsessed with the idea of heroism, of sacrifice, of what it meant to die for something. He didn't just admire soldiers, he romanticized death in uniform. To a boy with too much imagination and too little supervision. That old flat wasn't just a home, it was a shrine. And something hidden in that back room would change all 3 boys' lives forever. It was on a hazy Saturday in late July when everything shifted. The boys had planned to meet near the edge of Ashfield Wood, a dense stretch of trees about a half-mile from Tommy's backyard. The fort, which they'd been building for weeks, was tucked behind a fallen elm tree and held together with rope nails and childhood pride. That day, Callum arrived looking oddly excited, his backpack heavier than usual, his grin a little too wide. Neville had complained the whole walk there about the heat, the bugs, the brambles that scratched his arms, but when he saw the fort, even he was impressed. The structure had a lookout perch made from a broken stepladder and a command post carved into the side of a rotted stump. They played their usual war games, sticks for rifles, pine cones for grenades. But something felt different. Callum kept glancing at his backpack like it was hiding treasure. Then, just as Neville was about to declare victory in their pretend ambush, Callum called them over with a smirk. "Want to see something real?" he said. From the pack, he pulled out a dull gray object and a pistol with a cracked grip. Tommy's stomach dropped. In Callum's hands were a Luger P08 pistol and what looked very much like a live grenade pin missing. The game had stopped. The danger wasn't imaginary anymore. For a moment, no one said anything. The forest, which had been alive with laughter and snapping branches just seconds before, fell silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. Neville's face turned ghost white as he stared at the grenade in Callum's hand, the thin metal lever pressed under his thumb. "Are you insane?" Neville shouted, voice cracking. That thing could kill us. Tommy felt his heart drop into his stomach. He knew Callum was obsessed with war, but this wasn't pretend anymore. Callum, however, looked completely calm. In fact, he smiled. "If I let go of this lever," he said quietly, "we all go out together. Like heroes." Tommy tried to reason with him. "There's no enemy here, Callum. We're not soldiers. This isn't a battle, it's suicide." Neville, now visibly shaking, took a step back, eyes darting toward the trail. Tommy saw it too. If Neville bolted, Callum might actually throw it. The thought made Tommy's blood run cold. Callum continued to monologue, talking about sacrifice and glory, like some warped war movie playing out in real life. That's when instinct took over. Without thinking, Tommy lunged forward, grabbed the grenade from Callum's hand, and threw it as far as he could into the brush. The three of them dropped to the ground, bracing for the blast. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. Then came the sound they hadn't expected. Callum laughing. "It's fake," he said, still grinning. "It's just a model." Tommy's relief was instant, but it wouldn't last long. Tommy barely had time to exhale before Callum doubled over in laughter, clutching his sides like it had all been some brilliant joke. Neville didn't laugh. He stood frozen still, processing the fact that he hadn't just died. "You think that's funny?" he hissed. But Callum was too caught up in the moment to care. Tommy, still shaken, managed a nervous laugh. Maybe out of relief, maybe disbelief. He gave Callum a light shove to the shoulder part. "Irritation part, you idiot, but thank God we're okay." And that's when it happened. Callum stumbled back a step, and something metallic slipped from his jacket. It hit a flat rock just beside his foot with a sharp clunk. A half-second later, the forest cracked with the deafening sound of a gunshot. Birds scattered overhead. Tommy's ears rang. For one horrifying moment, everything stood still until Neville collapsed. Tommy turned and saw him on the ground, eyes wide, blood seeping from his forehead. The Luger had discharged upon impact with the stone. The angle was impossibly unlucky, or lucky, depending on how you look at it. The bullet had grazed Neville's skull just above his right eye, slicing skin, but missing bone and brain by mere fractions of an inch. Tommy screamed for help, even though no one could hear them. Callum's face went pale as chalk, his hands trembling. This wasn't a prank anymore. This wasn't war games. It was real. And in that moment, surrounded by pine needles and panic, all three boys understood the weight of what had just happened. Childhood, in the space of a single gunshot, had come to a violent halt. Paramedics arrived within 20 minutes, sirens slicing through the sleepy countryside like a blade. Neville was rushed to the nearest hospital in Maidstone, where doctors stitched the wound and confirmed the miracle: the bullet had only grazed him. No surgery, no long-term damage, just a scar and a story. Callum's parents were devastated. His mother broke down at the kitchen table, repeating, "It could have been worse," while his father packed every military model and toy into garbage bags. The Luger, still warm from the shot, was confiscated by police. Mr. Briggs, Callum's grandfather, avoided charges barely. Back then, the UK's firearm laws were looser, and the weapon he claimed had been just a keepsake. Still, he was given a formal warning and was never left alone with Callum again. Tommy wasn't allowed back at the Briggs' flat. Callum, once the war-obsessed kid with grand delusions, was grounded for what felt like forever, and for the first time, he stopped talking about becoming a soldier. Callum never touched another model tank after that summer. The obsession that once defined him vanished overnight, replaced by a quiet caution that lingered into adulthood. He grew up to manage a Sainsbury's in Canterbury, an ordinary life far from the battlefield he once dreamed of. Neville, on the other hand, became something of a legend at school. Getting shot in the head and surviving earned him instant fame, a title he wore with pride and dark humor. Tommy, Callum, and Neville still catch up once in a while, and every so often, Neville will tap his forehead, smirk, and say, "Best thing that ever happened to me." Some stories from childhood fade with time. This one never did. It wasn't just about a prank gone wrong or a gun that should have stayed locked away. It was about how close we came to losing everything in a single stupid moment. We all walked out of those woods changed. Maybe a little quieter, maybe a little wiser, but definitely not the same. And to this day, when I hear the crack of a twig in the forest or the sharp snap of metal, my heart still skips just once, remembering the day pretend almost became permanent. Evan Miller was just 6 years old when his life in suburban Oregon quietly shifted. His mother had a close friendship with another woman in the neighborhood, which meant Evan was often left in the company of her son, Luca Darnell. From the outside, their connection seemed natural. Two boys spending time together at barbecues, school events, and backyard playdates. But beneath the surface, it was anything but equal. Luca was loud, controlling, and quick to decide what they would play and how. Evan, more reserved and obedient, became the follower in a dynamic he never asked for. Over time, he began to realize he wasn't really Luca's friend. He was more like an object Luca had claimed. And even at that young age, Evan sensed that being near Luca meant suppressing his own feelings to avoid conflict. As the years passed, the friendship between Evan and Luca didn't grow, it calcified. Luca treated Evan less like a companion and more like a toy, one he could bend a break and still expect to be there the next day. He had a talent for cruelty that flew under the radar. In classrooms and cafeterias, he kept his hands hidden while flicking rubber bands at Evan's ears or pinching the soft flesh behind his knee. Behind the school during recess, he'd grab Evan by the collar and choke him until he coughed or vomited, laughing as if it were a joke. At home, Evan's bruises were explained away as clumsiness, trips, falls, the usual childhood mishaps. But the truth was far more disturbing. Luca's abuse was calculated, consistent, and invisible to everyone else. Over time, Evan gained a reputation as a crybaby, a nervous wreck who couldn't keep it together. No one knew that behind that fragile exterior was a boy being systematically broken down by someone who called himself a friend, and Evan, too, afraid to lose the only connection he had kept silent. Somewhere along the way, Evan convinced himself that this was what friendship looked like. After all, Luca was always there. They spent weekends together, birthdays, snow days, moments that should have meant joy, but instead carried tension like a live wire humming under the surface. Luca never let Evan forget who was in charge. He'd smash Evan's toys during playtime, then laugh as if it were part of the game. When they played video games, Luca never handed over the controller, always promising Evan next turn that never came. But Evan clung to those weekends like lifelines, because by then, Luca had made sure he had no other friends. The isolation ran deep, and Evan started mistaking familiarity for closeness, even comfort. Looking back now, it's hard to believe he once called Luca his best friend. But at the time, it felt safer to pretend than to face the truth. Luca's house was everything Evan's wasn't, larger, colder, and filled with things Evan wasn't allowed to touch. There was a golden retriever that barked at him, a teenage sister who barely spoke, and a room with a shiny Nintendo that Luca never let him play. He'd sit and watch Luca defeat pixelated enemies, always promised a turn that never came. But what fascinated Evan most was the bunk bed in Luca's room. On the rare nights he had to sleep over, usually because his parents were away, Luca always insisted Evan take the top bunk. It felt like a privilege at first, a glimpse into something exciting. Later, Evan would realize Luca refused the top, not out of generosity, but because he was scared of heights. Like everything else in their relationship, even the smallest gesture came with an edge. Nothing with Luca was ever truly safe. One spring night, when Evan was 8 and Luca just a few months younger, something shifted from unsettling to outright dangerous. Evan had been forced to sleep over again. His parents were out of town, and as usual, Luca's house was the default. Around 2:00 a.m., Evan woke to the sharp sting of water splashed in his face. Luca stood beside the bunk bed, grinning in the dark. "We're going to the park," he whispered like it was some grand adventure. Evan didn't want to go, but he didn't have to say a word. Luca's hand was already reaching to pinch his arm in warning. Still half asleep and dressed only in pajamas, Evan slipped on his sneakers and followed. The neighborhood park was just a few blocks away, dimly lit by a single street lamp and swallowed in shadows. It was the kind of place that felt bigger and more threatening at night. Luca marched straight toward the jungle gym, the tallest one, the one he always called lame during the day. "Climb to the top," he ordered. And with a dry mouth and shaking hands, Evan obeyed. Evan climbed the jungle gym slowly, his small hands gripping the cold metal bars, slick with early morning dew. The structure loomed above him like a skeleton in the dark, and though the top wasn't more than 12 feet high, it felt like a mountain. He didn't look down. Luca stood below, watching silently. When Evan reached the top, he called down, voice trembling. "Now what?" Luca's answer came like a sentence. "Do a handstand." Evan blinked. "I can't," he replied. "Try," Luca snapped. "No." Silence followed, and then Luca turned away, disappearing into the shadows. Evan exhaled, hoping maybe that was the end of it. But then something struck him hard on the side of the head. A sharp, sudden burst of light exploded behind his eyes, and his balance gave way. He fell. His body crashed to the ground with a sickening thud, bones folding beneath him like paper. Pain lanced through every limb, then vanished into a kind of numbness. He could taste blood in his mouth, metallic and warm. His vision blurred as he stared up at the dim stars above. Somewhere nearby, footsteps crunched across the mulch. Evan couldn't move, couldn't scream. He wasn't alone, but the person approaching wasn't coming to help. Luca sat cross-legged beside Evan's broken body, his face strangely calm in the dim park light. Evan's vision was hazy, but he could see the satisfaction in Luca's eyes, like a boy admiring a project he'd just finished. "See what happens when you don't listen," Luca said, almost conversationally. Evan tried to speak, to move, but only a shallow, gurgling breath came out. Luca didn't flinch. Instead, he launched into a strange monologue, explaining how everything would have been fine if Evan had just obeyed. He rocked back and forth, voice steady, detached, like he was reciting a bedtime story. For a moment, Evan hoped Luca was in shock. But the longer Luca spoke, the clearer it became he wasn't scared. He was enjoying this. He didn't run for help. He just sat there lecturing the boy bleeding beside him. In that moment, Evan understood Luca might actually let him die, and that terrified him more than the pain. The pain came crashing in all at once, a searing white-hot wave that seemed to ignite every nerve in Evan's body. He couldn't tell where it hurt most, because everything hurt. His legs throbbed with an intensity that made him want to pass out, but at the same time, that pain gave him hope. If he could feel his legs, maybe he wasn't paralyzed. Still, he couldn't move, couldn't lift his head, couldn't scream. Luca kept talking, his voice, the only thing cutting through the agony. "You brought this on yourself," he said, as if Evan had jumped on purpose. Each word was like a slap. Evan drifted in and out the edges of the world, going soft and dim. In the haze of pain and betrayal, one horrifying truth began to settle in his mind. Luca was waiting. Not for help, but for Evan to stop breathing, so he wouldn't get blamed. Nearly an hour passed before Luca finally got up and walked away. Evan couldn't follow where he went, but soon the sound of footsteps doubled an adult's voice, shouting, a porch light flicking on in the distance. Then came the sirens. Blurred flashes of red and white broke through the dark, and suddenly hands were lifting him, voices speaking urgently above his head. Evan remembered almost nothing of the ride to the hospital or the initial hours of treatment. What he did remember was the moment doctors told his parents that the skull fracture matched the impact of a thrown rock. That was the first time anyone believed him. Once Evan could speak the truth poured out years of manipulation, cruelty, and abuse. The story horrified everyone. And the final confirmation came when paramedics found a jagged stone beneath the jungle gym, smeared with blood. Luca hadn't just watched, he'd aimed. Evan's injuries were severe: 2 broken legs, a fractured arm, cracked ribs, and a damaged vertebra. He underwent multiple surgeries over several weeks and spent months relearning how to walk. Even years later, he still walked with a slight limp. Luca's family was forced to cover the medical expenses, but no legal charges were filed. Instead, Luca was sent away to a long-term behavioral facility for troubled children, reportedly the youngest ever admitted. For Evan's family, it wasn't justice, but it was something. The physical scars slowly faded, but the psychological ones lingered. A few years later, Luca sent Evan a handwritten apology. Evan never read it. His parents let him toss it into a bonfire, and watching it burn was one of the most healing moments of his life. Forgiveness in that case wasn't necessary. What Evan needed was control over his voice, his truth, and finally his choice to let go. Years have passed, and Evan has never once tried to find out what became of Luca Darnell. He doesn't search his name online or ask mutual acquaintances. To him, Luca is a closed door, sealed, locked, and left behind. The best kind of revenge, Evan believes, is to treat someone like they never mattered. He no longer carries the weight of wondering why or hoping for closure. He got something better: freedom. And in that freedom, Evan found his own voice. Sharing this story now, after years of silence, isn't about reopening old wounds. It's about reclaiming the narrative. Evan doesn't want pity. He wants clarity. So if by chance Luca ever hears this, there's only one thing Evan wants him to know. You almost killed me. And for the first time in his life, Evan gets to say it on his own terms, with no fear and no apologies. Some stories never truly leave us. They shape the way we walk, trust, and remember. For Evan, survival wasn't just about healing broken bones. It was about unlearning fear, reclaiming his worth, and finally understanding that real friends don't leave scars. What Luca took from him was real, but what Evan reclaimed, that was his forever. Back in college, Eli Turner had a friend, or rather a lingering presence, named Miles Garrett. They had known each other since middle school in a quiet town in Oregon. From the start, Miles had always tried to stand out, but not in any charming or genuine way. He seemed obsessed with being different, purely for the sake of rebellion. Whenever their group liked a band, Miles would immediately denounce it as trash. He once claimed he wiped himself with a Metallica CD just to prove how much he hated them. Most people found him strange, but somehow, Miles was always there at bonfires, game nights, and after-school hangs, not because he was welcome, but because no one had the energy to push him away. By the time they entered college, most of the group had settled into dorms or shared dingy apartments. Miles, however, didn't really live anywhere. He floated from couch to couch, mostly between Derek's place and Eli's basement. In hindsight, it was strange how everyone let him stay around for so long without asking the obvious. What was Miles really searching for? And why did it feel like something darker was brewing beneath the surface? Miles had a home. Technically, his parents were alive, supportive, and more than willing to help him out. But he preferred to drift. He claimed it was liberating to not be tied down. But really, he just bummed off whoever was too polite to kick him out. His favorite place to crash was Derek's 3-bedroom apartment near campus, a semi-legendary pit stop among their group known for its questionable hygiene. Heavy metal posters and permanently stained couch. When Derek and the others got fed up, Miles would show up unannounced at Eli's house, usually climbing through the basement window like a raccoon in worn-out jeans and band patches. Eli had added a lock, but somehow Miles always got it open. One night, around 11 p.m., Miles arrived without warning again and flopped onto the couch as if he owned the place. While Eli gamed upstairs, Miles made himself at home, lighting up a bong and flipping through a torn-up copy of something that looked ancient. When Eli came down, Miles launched into a bizarre conversation about occult rituals and summoning demons. He waved around a beat-up copy of the Satanic Bible, swearing it held real power. Eli raised, Christian brushed it off as another one of Miles's weird phases. But deep down, something about Miles's intensity felt off this time. A few days after the strange basement conversation, Eli spotted Miles in a place that made his stomach tighten, the Central Park near campus. The park was a common hangout spot, a stretch of patchy grass and cracked concrete paths connecting the college to the nearby high school. College kids stuck to one side, high schoolers to the other. Seeing them together was rare, and that's what caught Eli's attention. Miles was sitting on a bench, surrounded by a small group of goth-leaning high school students. Most looked like sophomores, skinny jeans, heavy eyeliner, black hoodies even in the warm spring air. What made Eli pause wasn't just the age gap, but the way Miles was holding court, gesturing dramatically with a book in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Eli stayed back, pretending to read a textbook under a tree. From where he stood, he could hear bits and pieces of the conversation. Miles was talking about blood rituals, summoning spirits, and how he had mastered certain dark rites. It was absurd, but the younger kids looked intrigued, especially one girl with streaks of purple in her hair and a nervous smile. Her name was Natalie Quinn, and Eli recognized her immediately as the younger sister of his friend Jonah. She was 14, and Miles, at 22, was clearly directing most of his show toward her. Eli watched, frozen, torn between disgust and disbelief. Whatever this was, it had stopped being weird and was quickly becoming dangerous. Eli's gut told him something wasn't right. He lingered a little longer near the tree, pretending to scroll through his phone while keeping an eye on the group. Miles was leaning closer to Natalie now, speaking in hushed tones that made her glance nervously at the ground. Moments later, the two of them slipped away from the bench, heading down the trail toward the corner gas station. Eli didn't hesitate. He waited a few beats, then quietly followed. Sure enough, he spotted Natalie outside the store, standing awkwardly near the bike rack, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Before Eli could say a word, Miles came striding out of the store holding a plastic bag with 2 six-packs of cheap beer. He froze when he saw Eli, eyes darting, posture stiffening, and muttered something about heading out. Natalie avoided Eli's gaze, but it was clear she didn't want to be there. Eli asked where they were going already. Knowing the answer, Derek's place, he told Natalie plainly that Jonah wouldn't be okay with her hanging out with a grown man like Miles. She looked like she might cry. That was enough for Eli. He stepped aside, pulled out his phone, and dialed Derek, because whatever was going on, it had crossed the line. Eli's call to Derek was short but urgent. He explained everything: how Miles had been hanging around high schoolers, how he'd bought beer for Natalie, and how he was planning to take her to Derek's apartment. Derek, who had always been patient to a fault, went quiet. Then he said, "I've got it. I'll handle it." That was enough to ease Eli's nerves, but not entirely. He still had class, and he hated the idea of leaving Natalie in limbo, but he trusted Derek more than anyone else in their group. As Eli walked toward campus, he kept checking his phone, hoping for an update. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Miles had always been weird, sure, but this was something else, something predatory. And Natalie. She was just a kid, curious, impressionable, and probably flattered by the attention of an older guy who claimed to be powerful, mysterious, and rebellious. Eli had seen this pattern before, just never this close to home. Later that evening, after class and a long shower to wash off the day's anxiety, Eli headed to his basement to unwind. But what he found there stopped him cold. Miles was sitting cross-legged on the floor, shirtless, smeared with blood, and surrounded by candles. And in front of him lay a book open and stained red. Hours earlier, while Eli had been stuck in class, things had gone off the rails at Derek's apartment. Miles had shown up with Natalie in tow, acting like it was just another laid-back hangout. But the second he cracked open a beer and offered one to her, the room turned cold. Derek, sitting on the torn couch with a controller in hand, locked eyes with Natalie and knew something was wrong. She looked uncomfortable, nervous in a way that had nothing to do with being the youngest in the room. When Miles started talking about initiating her into some so-called rite involving intimacy and spiritual bonding, Derek stood up. He told Miles to back off, but Miles, high and slurring his words, kept pressing, claiming it was consensual and sacred. The other roommates joined in, one of them calling Jonah Natalie's older brother. Jonah arrived in minutes, took one look at his sister, flushed, confused, holding an open can of beer, and then saw Miles. That was all it took. Jonah tackled him to the floor without a word. The apartment exploded in chaos, yelling glass, breaking Derek, trying to keep it from becoming a police call. After Jonah dragged Natalie out, battered and humiliated, Miles fled. No one knew where he went until Eli opened the basement door and found him performing a blood ritual on the floor, babbling about betrayal and retribution. The blood, as it turned out, was his own. He'd sliced shallow lines across his chest and arms, smearing it over a warped paperback of the Necronomicon, like some deranged altar. Eli didn't speak. He backed away slowly and reached for his phone. Eli had seen Miles act bizarre before, but nothing like this. The basement, dimly lit by flickering tea candles, smelled of sweatweed and iron. Miles sat shirtless on the cold concrete floor, his face bruised and swollen from Jonah's punches, dried blood crusting at the corners of his mouth. He was hunched over a plastic convenience store slushy cup filled with something dark and viscous, most likely his own blood. A jagged utility knife lay beside him, smeared and glinting under the candlelight. Pages of a book. The Necronomicon, bent and stained, were spread out before him like sacred scripture. When Eli stepped in, towel still slung over his shoulder from his shower, Miles looked up slowly, eyes glassy and wild. "They betrayed me," he muttered, voice hoarse. "But I'll be avenged. This'll bind them to the consequences." He dragged his finger through the blood and smeared a crude symbol on the page. Eli's first instinct was to bolt, but instead he backed out quietly, not wanting to escalate whatever delusion Miles had descended into. Upstairs, he locked the door, grabbed his phone, and called Derek. His voice shook as he relayed what he'd just witnessed. 15 minutes later, Derek pulled up in his beat-up Toyota. The two of them went back downstairs together, gloves on, bucket ready, and dragged the bleeding, raving mess that used to be their friend out into the yard. Miles didn't resist. He just laughed, eyes staring at something neither of them could see. The moment Miles hit the grass, Derek stood over him and said what Eli had been too shaken to voice: "You're done." There was no more room for second chances, no more benefit of the doubt. Whatever Miles had become, it wasn't just a weird friend going through a phase. It was dangerous, manipulative, and predatory. As he lay there, bleeding, half laughing and half mumbling about curses and spirits, Derek leaned in close and made it clear if they ever heard he'd spoken to another high schooler again, ever, they would go straight to the police. No more warnings, no more rescues. Miles didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just lay on his back, eyes wide, whispering something to the clouds like they were listening. That night, Derek helped Eli install a new lock on the basement window, the one Miles had slipped through too many times before. It clicked shut with a finality that Eli hadn't realized he needed until that moment. The circle was broken. The tie was cut. And as strange as it felt, Eli knew they'd done the right thing, not just for Natalie, but for themselves. For the first time in years, the air around them felt clean again. Like maybe the spell had finally lifted. In the weeks that followed, Miles Garrett became a ghost in their town, not the mysterious kind people missed, but the kind they crossed the street to avoid. Whispers about him spread fast, that he practiced blood rituals, that he tried to seduce underage girls with dark blessings, that he lived out of his car and talked to trees. Whether any of it was true didn't matter anymore. The reputation stuck. He stopped showing up at parties, stopped crashing on couches, and eventually stopped being seen at all. Eli, for his part, never spoke to him again. There were no apologies, no explanations, no moments of closure. Just silence, and that was enough. Sometimes when the night was too quiet, he'd wonder what had really gone wrong with Miles. Had the darkness always been there waiting? Or had they all just ignored the warning signs for too long? Years later, when Eli retold the story, it wasn't for drama or pity. It was a warning, because evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it sleeps on your couch, eats your food, and waits just long enough for you to stop paying attention. Eli never saw Miles again after that night, not in person anyway. Just a name whispered now and then, attached to rumors and shadows. Life moved on. People graduated, moved away, built new circles. But every so often, when Eli passed that old basement window or heard the hum of a late-night party, he'd remember. Not the blood or the books, but the silence they all kept for too long. And he'd remind himself, some friendships don't fade, they rot. And knowing when to walk away can be the bravest thing you ever do. Jason Linwood had always been the kind of guy who blended easily into high school life, skateboard in hand. A casual smile and a love for anime that was just about fun. His best friend Aaron Miles, since freshman year, was the goofball everyone liked, always cracking jokes and never taking himself too seriously. Together, they shared late-night talks about their favorite shows and upcoming skate sessions. Jason admired Aaron's easygoing nature, the kind that made tough days bearable. Little did he know the summer ahead would change everything, testing not just their friendship, but the very essence of who Aaron was. What started as harmless fandom was about to take a dark turn that would shake their world forever. Just before summer break, Aaron suffered a bad break, literally. A skateboarding accident left him with a fractured leg, confined to his room for the entire 3 months. What was supposed to be a temporary setback quickly became a turning point. With nothing but time and the internet, Aaron dove deep into the world of anime, but not the lighthearted kind he and Jason used to enjoy. Instead, he got hooked on darker, more adult-themed series, spending hours glued to his screen and sharing increasingly strange posts online. Jason noticed the shift, but convinced himself it was just a phase, hoping his friend would bounce back once school started again. Little did he know that summer would change Aaron in ways no one expected, setting off a chain of events that would test their friendship and change the school's social landscape forever. When Jason returned from a family trip to Europe, he decided to check in on Aaron, curious to see how his friend was holding up. What greeted him was unexpected: a room transformed into a shrine of sorts, walls lined with shelves packed tightly with anime figurines. But these weren't the playful, colorful characters they once admired. Instead, the collection was dominated by lifelike female figures in provocative poses and minimal clothing. Aaron proudly walked Jason through his growing array, explaining the order in which he'd bought each piece. As Jason moved along the shelves, the displays became increasingly explicit, leaving him more uncomfortable with every step. It was a painfully awkward afternoon, one filled with a strange mix of fascination and unease. This bizarre new reality marked a clear break from the Aaron Jason thought he knew, raising questions Jason wasn't ready to face. When school started again, Aaron's strange new obsession made waves. He talked nonstop about anime waifus and proudly showed off his figurine collection to anyone who'd look. Unfortunately, most classmates didn't see it as cool. They laughed openly, making Aaron the target of constant ridicule. Jason felt the shift keenly. His longtime friend was now an outcast, and those close to Aaron started distancing themselves. Though Jason hadn't been one of the cool kids himself, he worried that hanging out with Aaron might drag down his own reputation. Seeking refuge, Jason found himself spending more time with Brandon and Ty, skating and joking around, trying to leave Aaron's weirdness behind. The gap between them grew, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. Then came Haley Tran, a new student, with a quiet confidence and a kindness that instantly drew people in. Jason quickly noticed Aaron's immediate hopeless crush on her. Haley, a Korean-American girl, quickly became the center of Aaron's world, though his approach was anything but normal. Instead of simply talking to her, Aaron chose the dramatic route straight out of an anime, leaving mysterious love notes in her locker. Haley caught him in the act after the third note, responding with gentle honesty. She wasn't interested in dating anyone right now, but offered her friendship instead. Jason admired her grace, but he also worried about how Aaron might take the rejection. This new dynamic was about to test everyone in ways none of them expected. At first, Haley tried her best to be kind, hoping to ease Aaron's obvious disappointment with gentle friendship. But Aaron's behavior quickly spiraled from awkward to uncomfortable. He began making inappropriate comments, lingering too close, and constantly bombarding her with pictures of his anime figurine collection, some of which were disturbingly explicit. Despite Haley's polite attempts to set boundaries, Aaron's advances only intensified, making her increasingly uneasy. Jason watched helplessly as his friend crossed line after line, and though anger bubbled beneath the surface, he hesitated to confront Aaron. He feared causing drama or losing what little connection remained. But as Haley's discomfort grew, so did Jason's realization ignoring the problem was no longer an option. The situation was unraveling, and the fallout would affect everyone in their tight-knit school community. One afternoon, everything came to a head. Haley broke down in tears in Jason's car, finally admitting just how much Aaron's behavior was hurting her. She handed Jason her phone, revealing a flood of private messages from Aaron, messages filled with unsettling fantasies, calling her his waifu, and expressing a disturbing obsession that ignored her boundaries entirely. Jason's stomach twisted as he scrolled through the texts, feeling a heavy mix of anger, guilt, and helplessness. He had known Aaron was obsessed, but seeing the raw, one-sided fixation laid bare was something else entirely. It shattered the remnants of the friend Jason once trusted. That moment was a turning point, not just for Haley and Jason, but for the whole tangled web of relationships. Jason realized that if he didn't act now, the consequences would be far worse. His loyalty to Aaron collided with a growing sense of responsibility to protect Haley and himself from further harm. The next day at school, Jason confronted Aaron in no uncertain terms, telling him to back off and leave Haley alone. To Jason's surprise, Aaron backed down for about a week. For a brief moment, it seemed like the storm might pass. Jason felt a flicker of relief, hopeful that his warning had finally reached his friend. But deep down, he knew Aaron's obsession wasn't so easily broken. The uneasy calm didn't last long. As the days passed, Jason sensed the tension building again, and he worried that things were far from over. The fragile peace was just the quiet before the inevitable storm. The fragile peace shattered in the worst possible way. One morning, Haley found crude, explicit images pasted all over her locker, images grotesquely photoshopped with her face on provocative anime characters. In her backpack, an open condom was shoved inside, a terrifying sign of how far Aaron's obsession had spiraled. Meanwhile, Jason's car had been vandalized, with deep scratches and hateful slurs were scrawled on his own locker. It was clear Aaron was escalating his harassment beyond just words and private messages. Then, in a shocking public outburst, Aaron stormed across the school quad, dreaming about how Haley had broken his heart and ruined his life. Before anyone could react, he lunged at Haley, pulling her into a desperate, unwanted embrace, and according to witnesses, he groped her chest. The scene stunned everyone into silence, except for Jason, who immediately rushed forward, unleashing all the anger and disgust he'd bottled up into a furious barrage of punches. The fight was raw and chaotic, but Jason's desperate intervention stopped Aaron before things got even worse. It was a moment charged with pain, betrayal, and a fierce protective instinct that changed everything. The aftermath was a whirlwind of consequences. Jason was suspended for nearly a month as the school investigated the incident, though security footage and witness statements confirmed Aaron's guilt in the harassment and assault. Thankfully, Jason narrowly avoided expulsion and a criminal record, but the experience left him shaken. Aaron faced severe backlash from classmates and family alike, leading to his transfer to another school. and being held back a year. Despite everything, Haley chose not to press charges, worried that doing so might bring more trouble for Jason. The situation was far from perfect justice, but the community's collective disgust made it clear that Aaron's actions were unacceptable. Jason carried the weight of the events with him, knowing he had acted out of desperation, but also that silence would have been far worse. 6 years later, Jason and Haley remained together, their bond stronger for having endured so much. Haley asked Jason to share their story, not to shame Aaron, but to shed light on the dangers of obsession and the importance of standing up for what's right. Despite everything, she feels compassion for Aaron, understanding that his struggles ran deeper than anyone realized. Jason reflects that kindness isn't always enough to save someone, but courage in speaking out at the right moment can protect those we love and maybe even ourselves. In the end, this story isn't just about a friendship lost or a dark obsession. It's a reminder that staying silent in the face of wrongdoing only lets it grow. True strength comes from having the courage to speak up, protect those we care about, and face uncomfortable truths. Sometimes doing the right thing means making hard choices, but it's those choices that shape who we are. Jason and Haley's journey shows us that even in the darkest moments, hope and healing are possible when we stand together. During his junior year of high school, Ethan was just an average kid. He did okay in school, played football and baseball, and mostly hung out with the usual crowd of jocks. Then came Caleb, a quiet, intensely intelligent, and mysterious boy who didn't seem to fit in with the rest of the students. One day, Caleb approached Ethan with an unexpected confidence, introducing himself and boldly declaring that he was going to be Ethan's new best friend. Ethan, being easygoing and curious, didn't think much of it and agreed to hang out. They started spending time together, playing video games, going to the mall, and fishing, typical teenage activities during the 2010s. However, Caleb's secrecy soon became noticeable. He never invited Ethan to his house and gave inconsistent stories about his family. For example, he claimed to have a younger brother who had died, a detail Ethan later discovered was false. These inconsistencies were the first signs that Caleb's world was far from ordinary. Instead of just bending the truth, Caleb seemed to reshape reality to suit his own mysterious purposes. What began as a seemingly harmless friendship soon took a darker turn, setting the stage for unsettling experiences that would profoundly impact Ethan's life. As their friendship developed, Ethan found himself drawn into Caleb's enigmatic world. They spent countless hours together, gaming marathons that stretched into the early morning, aimless afternoons at the mall, and quiet evenings by the lake, fishing poles in hand. To an outsider, it might have seemed like any typical teenage friendship in suburban America. But beneath the surface, something felt off. Caleb was always guarded, never inviting Ethan to his home or introducing him to any family members. When pressed, Caleb shared stories that didn't quite add up. He spoke of a younger brother who had passed away, a loss so profound it seemed to justify his occasional mood swings and quiet moments. Yet Ethan later discovered that this brother never existed. Instead, Caleb had an older sister who was very much alive, a detail he had conveniently omitted. It wasn't just this one story. It seemed nearly every detail Caleb shared was tinged with subtle falsehoods, crafted carefully, yet with no clear purpose. Was it a game, a test? Ethan couldn't tell. The lies weren't malicious, but they were unsettling, like watching a puzzle with missing pieces. Caleb's fabrications ranged from harmless fibs about where he lived to more elaborate tales of family tragedies. These inconsistencies didn't push Ethan away at first. He chalked them up to Caleb's private nature and the quirks of adolescence. Still, the growing pattern of deception planted a seed of doubt, a quiet warning that this friendship might not be as straightforward as it seemed. The real question was, why? What was Caleb hiding behind those stories, and what did it mean for Ethan moving forward? As the months went by, Ethan began to notice Caleb's behavior, growing increasingly strange, and not just in his stories. Caleb confessed that his friendship wasn't just about companionship. It was a deliberate experiment. Bored with ordinary life, he wanted to see if he could maintain a fabricated persona and manipulate those around him without being caught. This unsettling admission explained the tangled web of lies Ethan had been untangling, but it also revealed something darker. Caleb wasn't just lying to amuse himself. He was playing a game with Ethan's trust as the ultimate prize. More disturbingly, Ethan discovered that Caleb had been sneaking into his house during visits to steal seemingly insignificant items, things that wouldn't immediately raise alarms. A bottle of bleach here, a ceramic figurine there, a small trinket from Ethan's grandmother's bedroom. These stolen objects were never about their value. They were trophies, proof of Caleb's control, and a way to deepen the psychological hold he was exerting. The realization sent a chill through Ethan. He wasn't just being deceived, he was being manipulated in a way that felt both invasive and terrifying. Caleb's experiments blurred the line between harmless mischief and psychological torment. It was as if he wanted to prove he could unravel someone's life one small piece at a time while Ethan remained oblivious. This creeping invasion of trust forced Ethan to question the very foundation of their friendship and wonder how far Caleb's game would go, and if it was already too late to escape. As their senior year unfolded, Caleb's unsettling games took an even darker turn. He began dropping hints, cryptic, chilling comments that sent a ripple of fear through Ethan. Caleb talked casually about enjoying cruelty, bragging about harming a neighborhood cat, and stalking a woman in the shadows. These weren't just strange stories. They were calculated moves to scare Ethan to assert dominance in their twisted dynamic. When Ethan asked about the so-called trophies Caleb mentioned, the answers were vague and cloaked in mystery, adding to the growing sense of dread. This psychological warfare wore on Ethan's nerves, transforming what had once been a confusing but bearable friendship into a source of anxiety. Slowly, Ethan started to pull away, sensing the toxicity beneath Caleb's charm and intellect. The carefree days of fishing and mall trips gave way to cautious distance and uneasy silences. What once felt like harmless mischief now loomed as a warning sign Caleb was no longer just bored. He was dangerous in ways Ethan hadn't imagined. The shift was subtle but undeniable, and Ethan knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. The question wasn't just how to escape Caleb's grip, but whether the damage had already been done. In the quiet moments between classes and the long nights alone, Ethan wrestled with fear, confusion, and a desperate hope that this nightmare would soon end. Then came the moment that changed everything. One ordinary afternoon, Ethan was called to the school office without any warning. Anxiety flooded his chest as he walked the familiar halls, wondering what crisis awaited him. When he arrived, the principal, her secretary, and a member of the security team were waiting. They informed Ethan they needed to search his backpack and locker due to multiple reports from students alleging he had a hit list and was in possession of firearms at school. The accusations hit Ethan like a freight train. Confused and terrified, he emptied his bag, just textbooks, notebooks, and a pair of gym socks. The principal and security guard exchanged uneasy glances, but nothing suspicious was found. Still, the weight of the false claims crushed him. Ethan broke down in tears, desperate to understand why he was being targeted. The secretary offered comfort, but when Ethan asked who had accused him, she couldn't say. It soon became clear. These rumors were a tangled web of deception, likely spun by someone with a twisted sense of control. After further investigation, the school admitted the allegations were baseless and apologized, but the damage lingered. Ethan was left shaken and suspicious, though he didn't yet connect the dots. The entire ordeal was a stark reminder of how dangerous unchecked rumors could be, and how quickly one's life could spiral from the manipulations of someone hiding behind a mask of friendship. After graduation, Ethan thought he had finally escaped Caleb's shadow. He left his hometown behind and started college in a distant state, eager to put the chaos of high school far behind him. Yet the past had one last cruel twist. Out of nowhere, Ethan received an email from Caleb. The message was chilling, a detailed confession, and a disturbing reminder of everything Caleb had done. He admitted to fabricating the lies, manipulating rumors, and stealing those odd, insignificant items from Ethan's home. Caleb even attached a photo, a collection of the stolen objects carefully arranged beside a newspaper, proving he had kept them as twisted trophies. The email was less about apology and more a cold flex, a reminder of the control he'd wielded from afar. Caleb boasted about orchestrating the false accusations at school, explaining how he had hidden behind layers of deception, keeping everyone, including Ethan, blinded. The intention wasn't just to scare, but to prove a point that he could dismantle a person's life at will and then walk away unscathed. For Ethan, the message reopened old wounds, leaving him to grapple with a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. He realized Caleb's games weren't just adolescent mischief, they were deliberate acts of psychological torment. Yet Ethan chose silence, refusing to engage, hoping Caleb's need for power would eventually fade. Still, the lingering question haunted him. How much damage had really been done, and what might happen if Caleb ever decided to play again? Though Ethan chose not to respond, the shadow Caleb cast lingered. Every unexpected twist or unexplained misfortune made Ethan wonder if Caleb was behind it, if his tormentor's boredom had resurfaced. The fear of the unknown gnawed at him, a constant reminder that some wounds don't fully heal. Yet, amidst the anxiety, Ethan held onto hope that Caleb had moved on, that his destructive games were over. Still, the question remained: if Caleb ever got bored again, would Ethan be ready to face whatever new torment awaited? The story ends with that uneasy, haunting uncertainty. In the years since, Ethan has tried to move forward, building a life far from the shadows Caleb cast. Yet the experience left an indelible mark, a reminder of how easily trust can be broken and how fragile safety feels when someone bent on destruction is so close. Though Caleb disappeared from his life, the memory lingers like a silent warning. Sometimes the most dangerous games are played behind a friendly smile, and for Ethan, that uneasy truth will never fully fade. Emma lived in Brighton, a vibrant coastal city, known for its lively LGBTQ+ community. As a pansexual woman, she embraced the colorful scene, often spending evenings with her close friend Liam, a flamboyant gay man with a magnetic personality. Their friendship was filled with laughter, late-night talks, and shared adventures. Brighton's summer buzzed with energy, and their bond reflected that spirit, full of warmth, trust, and fun. But beneath the surface of their carefree nights, a darker tension was about to surface, one that would forever change Emma's life and challenge everything she thought she knew about friendship. One warm summer evening, Emma and Liam planned to kick off the night with some pre-party drinks at Emma's cozy apartment before heading to Brighton Beach's biggest bash, a highly anticipated event hosted by a popular local radio station. The air was thick with excitement, the kind that only a vibrant coastal city can offer in the height of summer. As they sipped their cocktails, laughter filled the room, mixing with chatter about their favorite TV shows and weekend plans. Emma, buzzing with anticipation, casually mentioned her Tinder date, scheduled for later that night. Liam's jovial expression shifted subtly, his eyes flickering with unease. Unbeknownst to Emma, this simple revelation was about to trigger a chain of events no one could have predicted. Liam's lighthearted demeanor suddenly dimmed as Emma mentioned her Tinder date. He grew tense, launching into a worried rant about the dangers of meeting strangers online. Despite online dating becoming commonplace across America, Liam's fears echoed old-school caution, almost like an overprotective grandparent's warnings. Emma laughed it off, brushing his concerns aside as outdated paranoia. After all, she'd navigated the dating apps before without issue. But Liam wouldn't drop it. His unease lingered, growing more intense with every word. The room's easy atmosphere shifted subtly, hinting at a storm brewing just beneath the surface, one that would soon shatter the night's carefree vibe. Emma was finishing up her makeup in front of the mirror, excitement bubbling for her upcoming date. But then, unexpectedly, Liam stepped up behind her. Without warning, his arms snaked around her neck in a chokehold, his grip tightening as he whispered harsh warnings about the dangers lurking in the night. "Strange men can overpower you easily," he hissed, his voice tense and urgent. Emma's laughter turned nervous as she struggled trying to wiggle free, but Liam's hold only grew firmer, cutting off her breath. Panic surged as her vision blurred and she screamed, "Get off me!" In a desperate move, she elbowed him hard in the ribs, hard enough to hear a crack. That snapped Liam's control. He slammed her forward into the mirror, shattering it with a brutal crash. Blood rushed into Emma's eyes as Liam's fists rained down on her face and neck. Desperately, she clawed and slapped, even spitting a broken tooth at him. Suddenly, Liam recoiled, terror flooding his eyes, as if chased by something invisible. The nightmare had only just begun. After the terrifying attack, Liam's frantic energy took over. He paced wildly, eyes darting as if fleeing an unseen threat. Emma, still shaken and bleeding, watched in horror, unsure what had possessed her friend. Then, just as suddenly, Liam collapsed onto the couch, tears quietly streaming down his face. The violent rage faded into raw vulnerability. Emma sensed something deeper. This wasn't just anger, but a fractured mind struggling to hold itself together. The friend she knew seemed lost, replaced by a frightening stranger battling demons within. Emma soon learned the shocking truth. Liam had taken a drug that afternoon, a white powder laced with unknown substances. Friends who shared the same dealer warned her that the batch was contaminated, causing severe psychological reactions. What had seemed like a moment of uncontrollable violence was actually a terrifying drug-induced psychotic break. The revelation explained Liam's unpredictable behavior, but didn't erase the pain Emma endured. It was a harsh reminder of how a single poor choice and dangerous substances lurking on the streets could transform a beloved friend into a source of danger and fear. Following the terrifying night, Emma wasted no time calling the authorities to ensure Liam received immediate help. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, and Liam was taken into care for evaluation and treatment. Meanwhile, Emma sought medical attention for her injuries, cuts, bruises, and the broken tooth that would require costly dental work. Despite the pain and trauma, Emma wrestled with complex feelings toward Liam. Eventually, she agreed to drop all charges on one condition: Liam would pay for her dental restoration and promised to stay away. She recognized that while Liam hadn't fully intended to hurt her, his actions reflected deeper issues she couldn't ignore. Protecting her own safety became Emma's top priority, closing a painful chapter but hoping for Liam's recovery. Though Emma holds no hatred for Liam, the trust between them was irrevocably broken. She hopes he's found help and isn't a danger to anyone else. For Emma, the experience was a painful lesson in self-preservation and the limits of forgiveness. Sometimes walking away is the only way to heal and protect what matters most. If this story grabbed your attention and sparked your curiosity, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe so you never miss a new video. We dive deep into real-life stories that are strange, thrilling, and sometimes downright unbelievable, just like this one. Drop your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your voice makes this community richer and stronger. Share this video with friends who love exploring the unusual. Your support means the world to us and keeps these stories coming. Join us on this journey into the extraordinary, because some stories aren't meant to be forgotten.